So I see people joining on Zoom. As people join, I'm just going to speak slowly until I see at least most of them have actually joined the actual meeting. But welcome everyone to our unusual talk today. I'm just going to wait a little bit longer until everyone is joining. I know next to the people in the Zoom room, we also have a lot of people watching online that are able to stream this session via LinkedIn Live and a couple of other formats. So see people are there and I would like to then kick off. So welcome everyone to our unusual talk today. My name is Saskia Breusden. I'm one of the co-founders and also CEO of Yunus Social Business. And as many of you may know, co-founded by Mohammed Yunus, we believe in the power of business to end poverty and the climate crisis. We do that as being an impact investing fund on the one hand, but also on the other hand, and that's really going to be the focus of today, we partner closely with corporations to help them use their core competences to solve the world's challenges. And one of those tools is through corporate social entrepreneurship, harnessing the power of employees to actually make a difference. In 2021, together with the World Economic Forum and the Schwab Foundation, we launched the Unusual Pioneers platform, which was and is a platform for corporate social entrepreneurs and also their C-level executives to help grow corporate social business within the company. So business units that solve social or environmental problems and have that as their focus, and use that as a tool to transform the corporation as a whole. This platform, had a number of distinguished guests. Among others, we had Paul Polman as one of our speakers, and I'll introduce him in a second. And also Accenture has been one of the participants and had one of the fellows of the Unusual Pioneer program and platform. And so that is really the reason that brought the three of us here together in this context. So I'm really, really honored to have these next 40 minutes here in the public live stream, and afterwards we'll have a short private session as well with both Peter Lacey, who's Peter Lacey and also Paul Polman. And let me actually introduce these two wonderful speakers to you today, with whom I will be speaking about how we actually not just talk about purpose, but how we actually concretely bring purpose to life in a large corporation. So let me quickly start with Peter. So Peter is on the global executive board at Accenture, where he serves as the company's global sustainability services lead and also their chief responsibility officer. So Peter, I think you have a big responsibility on your shoulders with the work that you're doing. It's a very, very important job, if not the most important job in a large organization. You obviously look after everything related to Accenture's sustainability and ESG topics. You obviously have 3 decades, I don't know, you don't look that old, of strategy and sustainability consulting experience. And if that wasn't enough, you're also a best-selling author of 2 books, Waste to Wealth and the Circular Economy Handbook. So big hand to Peter for joining us today. Thanks, Peter, for being here on the panel. And next to that, I have another very distinguished speaker here with me, and also by now friend, I would say, Paul. We had Paul Polman, obviously. I mean, your reputation precedes you. I had the pleasure to meet you about 10 years ago at your somewhat still earlier in your tenure as CEO of Unilever. And we met in Ulusaba in South Africa at Sir Richard Branson's Game Reserve, where we were speaking about founding the B Team at that stage, which is an initiative that you've still been sharing for the last 10 years. And I still remember meeting you and thinking, is he now an activist or is he a CEO? And the nice thing, and that is the important thing, is you're both an activist and a CEO, sort of an activist in mindset and a CEO in the operating model. And thereby you've been really an inspiration, not only to me, but the broader, let's say, business as a force for good community. And apart from that, of course, from like making Unilever such a successful company, you've also next to that written a best-selling book, which we'll be speaking about today, called Net Positive: How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. So I'm really excited to have this dynamic duo here with me today. And with that, I really want to kick off and get right into it so we have enough time for the discussion. So Paul, let's jump right into you and into your book Net Positive that just got launched. The term is beautiful and I like it a lot, but can you tell the audience, what does net positive mean for you? What does a net positive company look like? And perhaps just mention those, let's say 3-4 things that a net positive company needs to include. Floor is yours.
Yeah, I will, Saskia, and certainly fun to do this together again, and safe travels. I know you're calling from Brazil. And but a lot of respect for what you're doing with the Yunus social business, and obviously with the unusual pioneers. We need more unusual pioneers in this world. And I was just looking at the numbers, touching 13 million people with the work you're doing is not a small number. And so thank you for that. And Peter, obviously, Accenture is such an incredible company with 650,000 employees. You know, having 7,000 clients. If you want a multiplier effect and change the system and change the world, the first doorbell I would ring is the house of Accenture. And it's glad to see that Julie, in her relatively new job still, has risen to that challenge and shows what courageous leadership looks like. But we know each other already for the last 15 years, and the work you've done, especially with me, with the UN Global Compact, but also the commitments you're now driving in the company around climate change, diversity, and obviously understanding that at the end of the day, a lot of it is in the design and innovation stage. So with your sustainable innovation challenge that you talked about, my full respect for what you're doing. You know, I never wanted to write a book because many see, and it's not for Peter, he's an expert on circular economy, so he's right to write these 2 books, which are, by the way, are wonderful readings. But I never wanted to write a book because all the CEOs I see writing books, it's either because they want to rewrite history or they want to stroke their ego. And none of that was very appealing to me. But finally, Adi Ignatius from Harvard said, you have to write something because the knowledge you have and what you have done, although it's coming from everybody, you should make that available to more companies that we're reaching out. And what we're really trying to do with the book is reframe what good looks like. The people are broadly convinced about the bigger challenges, Saskia, you mentioned on climate change and inequality. We all want to move into that direction, but it's very clear that we're not moving with the speed and scale that is needed. And there are some challenges that get in the way. In enrolling companies at critical mass, bringing these big partnerships together, and Accenture has done a wonderful study on trust, we can talk, and then forming these broader systems changes that are needed. So this book is a very practical book, written based on experience by a CEO who's done it 10 years, who has been on that journey of net positive. The argument for net positive is very simple. The last year, the World Overshoot Day was July 29th, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish. In other words, after that day, we're actually stealing from future generations. This world has been around for 4.6 billion years. Make that 46 years for this comparison. In those 46 years, human beings have been around for 4 hours. The Industrial Revolution started only 1 minute ago, and yet we have cut down 50% of the world's forests. We've lost 70% of the world's species, reptiles, mammals. Climate change is still well out of the range that we can, manage with some sense of security. So, and that all happened in this generation. So the argument of the book is very simple, Saskia. It's not good enough anymore to be in CSR, which is less bad. I used to murder 10 people. Now I only murder 5 people, so I'm a better murderer. It just doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for anybody. So people say, I get this. So I want to be sustainable. This is where all these net zero pledges come in. I don't want to be good. I don't want to be bad. It's a noble position to be in. But when a world that has overshot its boundaries, the only thing that will be acceptable for companies to be around long term is to think regenerative, restorative, reparative. And that we call net positive, just as nature actually is net positive. So we try to create this movement of this mindset change with a very simple question. How can companies profit from solving the world's problems, not from creating them? And a follow-up question to each company: is the world better off because your company is in it? Yes or no? The characteristics of a net positive company are first and foremost a company that takes responsibility of its total impact in this world. Its handprint, not just its footprint. All consequences, intended or not. Too many companies still think they can outsource their value chain and also outsource their commitments. That doesn't work anymore. Just making climate change agreements for scope 1 and 2 by 2050, when we need to solve a lot of it by 2030, including in scope 3, etc., is what we need. Take responsibility for all your consequences. Where Facebook goes wrong is not in the product they provide. Clearly, a lot of people like it. But if you don't take responsibility of child addiction, undermining democracy, or hate speech on their platforms, you're not a net positive company. The second thing a net positive company does is works for the longer term, optimizing the return for all of its stakeholders. It understands the importance to work with their communities, the employees, the partners in the value chain, the planet itself, future generations. It understands that by optimizing the longer term return of all of its stakeholders, it also has the best chances of optimizing shareholder return. And the last characteristic, I would say, is a company that is actually involved in the broader transformations that we need in society. Currently, we're optimizing things with a lot of pressure in a system that is not designed to deliver. It gets close to the definition of insanity. That's why so many people are overworked and mental illnesses. We need to work on the system, and net positive companies actually do that. It requires you to be consistent, transparent, and all the things we can talk about. But first and foremost, it's a leadership story. You can't have a purposeful company or a sustainable company or a courageous company if you don't have the individuals themselves being courageous, purposeful, or sustainable. So that's really the beginning and the end of our story. And again, we can dive into that a little bit more in detail.
Fantastic. No, I think that explains your compelling vision that I fully buy into, Paul. So thank you for that. And perhaps just going over to you, Peter. I mean, Paul just mentioned all of these beautiful net zero until XYZ year commitments that corporations are now committing to, and also, of course, some of them have commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals, so the SDGs. But I feel that there's still a gap between the big commitments that people make and the actual actions that they take. I'm happy that the commitments are there because that's the first step. But when do the actions follow? And I think obviously you're consulting thousands of companies around the world, Peter. Can you help us understand how are you helping your clients to bring this vision that Paul has just laid out, which I hope you buy into as well, to your clients? How do you make your clients net positive? How do you?
Well, so Saskia, thank you first of all for the invitation, and let me sort of start by saying, I mean, we really are in the presence of sustainability royalty with Paul. I mean, really. And I don't say, and he won't like that because he won't like the praise, but I mean, the incredible impact and example that he's served over the 15 years that I've known him. And I don't mean that simply in terms of his commitment to sustainability and what he's done across the World Business Council, the UN, the B Corp, the WEF, all of these other things. But the reason for me that Paul is such a phenomenal transformational leader is that he was able to take Unilever to a better place as a company defined by the old metrics as well as the new metrics, right? I mean, shareholder value and leading the industry as well as the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, right? And Paul, you will. You and I have discussed that you were attacked for that at the beginning, you were attacked for that at the end, and you had to defend yourself on multiple different fronts, right? But if you look at Paul's record in his job, in delivering shareholder and stakeholder value, There are very, very few people in history who can claim to have done it more to the point of net positive. So I just wanted to say that because I have a lot of respect for that. That I think plays out in the book, which is a great book and a great practical guide to how others can be these courageous leaders. I wanted to pick up on a few different things to your point, Saskia, about how you think about doing this in reality. Firstly, there is a reality versus rhetoric gap. We've got to be open and honest about that. That is true. And that is true at the macro level of governments, and it's true at the micro level of individual companies still. Now, we are making progress, let's be clear. Right? It is not that we are going backwards on corporate action, but there's a lot more to be done. A couple of things I would pick up on from what Paul said and in the book. First, you do have to tackle it at the systemic level, right? You do have to make sure that governments are signing up to the right targets, the capital markets are working effectively, and governance and boards and leaders are working effectively. That's where I think one thing that we can be thankful for is that some of the things that happened at COP26, I thought Al Gore put it very, very well. Like when you think of COP, you think of, he always puts things very well, Al Gore, but he put it very well, narrow COP and broad COP. Narrow COP is this document that turns up on the final day and always disappoints, right? With the exception of possibly Paris, right? But broad COP is the things that happen in the 18 months building up to COP and the 18 months after COP. And in this last Glasgow COP, I think if you look at the 130 trillion made available by 450 banks to help support the transition from the private capital perspective, or perhaps even more importantly, the coming together for the first time in my career of the biggest bodies setting standards together with the support of the auditors and assurers, but TCFD, SASB, all of the IFRS, so a lot of acronyms there. But basically, I would argue sustainability just had a once in a lifetime, once in a generation moment that it became the equivalent of the GAP principles. Like the GAP principles changed accounting and finance. What just happened at Glasgow, which I don't know that everyone has absorbed yet, is that we will have one global standard and one global standard setter. Of course, there'll still be GRI, there'll still be science-based targets initiatives, and I welcome that. But we will have one disclosure and reporting standard. Now, as a company, we believe, and I believe, you have two choices, and you have two choices in a fork in the road. And one is to go down the route of Paul's book, right? Which is to fundamentally recognize that the future success of companies will be what we call 360-degree value. There's different ways of putting it, net positive 360-degree value, right? Or you go down the route of saying this is about disclosure, reporting, tidying it up a little bit of assurance, a bit of audit, and we'll be fine. Well, guess what? You won't be fine. Because between 2025 and 2030, the world will spend between 30 and 50 trillion on delivering the Sustainable Development Goals and the clean energy transition. Compare that to the digital revolution, and that's 34 trillion. Put those two things together, and we have a shot at transforming and delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. But companies need to start to do what Paul describes in his book, which is they need to rethink strategy, they need to retool their organization, they need to reskill their people to be able to identify new sources of value that are better for the world and better for shareholders, by the way, right? Stakeholders and shareholders. And they need to come up with new ways of providing what is ultimately a data revolution in being able to trade off environmental, social, and governance outcomes with business value creation. And I will tell you, that's what we do, and that's what we're focused on, is the end-to-end transformation with new forms of data, new tools, helping reskill organizations in the front office of products and services and development, right the way through to supply chains and scope 3, which Paul mentioned. And the final point I'll make is, I think it's incredibly important, the point both of you made. Ursula von der Leyen last week in the WEF made a brilliant point, that Europe's economy wants to be a circular economy based on the principles of clean energy and a socially progressive economy. It does not want to be a net zero economy and have destroyed the rest of the world's biodiversity and live in a 1.5 degree world where we've got oceans full of plastic, forests that have been destroyed, species that have been depleted. And I think she sounded a very important warning, which is it's very welcome that we have this focus on a 1.5 degree net zero world, but it is only one element of the Sustainable Development Goals and a sustainable future. And I worry that it's become synonymous with sustainability, or risks becoming synonymous with sustainability in that transformation.
And I think to both of you, Peter, I think you both sort of laid out your respective visions and how to what they would actually look like. But if you can tell me the one thing, in this case, Peter, that you would recommend to your clients, and Paul, the one thing that you would recommend to other CEOs. I don't know if you, I know that you cannot boil it down to one thing, but if there's one thing in terms of focus, what would it be to help them get to that transition? Because I want to focus more on the how rather than the what, because I think we're convinced about the broader picture.
I'll let Paul go first.
No problem.
Whole book in one sentence.
No problem. I was just trying to simplify it a little bit, but I think really, if there's a magic wand, I do have to take two things, if you don't mind. The first one is personal.
Okay, fine.
This is personal leadership. This is about consciousness. This is about setting the targets that are needed versus the targets you can get away with. This is about building trust by exposing yourselves. So we have to create higher levels of moral leadership. You know, if you look at 19% of the metrics are only linked to sustainability right now in companies. Less than 25% of companies have any decent strategy on climate. What the CEOs think they're doing and what the employees think they're doing has a lot of say-do gap. Only 25% of the CEOs have followed ESG training, 17% of the boards. We need to create that higher level of consciousness. COVID has helped us, has made us realize that we can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. That's one part, because nothing can change if humans don't change in their awareness of what is needed. And secondly, if there is one magic wand, is very simply that we start to value, next to financial capital, environmental and social capital. Yeah. So moving our GDP definition beyond producing more stuff, if you keep it simple, is absolutely a priority.
So the first one, very simple, change humanity, humans, and the second one, account for it better. That's good. Peter, you go ahead.
I thought the one I actually deliberately wanted to let Paul go first, because I thought he would cover that, because I do think, you know, so leadership and definitions and value of success. I totally agree with that. And then you take it down a level, and I think you get down to the point where you have to systematically, and Paul, you did this at Unilever, you systematically go through the organization and look at the touch points with each of the big issues in your industry and where there are harmful impacts or opportunities to have a net positive impact, to your point. And it has to be systematic through every function, through every product, through every level of the organization, so that it becomes actually the core business and the core business strategy. That's the second, the third, and I'm going to add a fourth as well, which is we live in a world where we have, in the last decade, seen scientific and technological breakthroughs that, to your point about Paul made the point about the Industrial Revolution being mere nanoseconds or minutes in the delivery. But even in the last 10 years, we have seen physical technologies in solar and wind or energy efficiency, or we've seen biological shifts in understanding the human genome and the links to nutrition and the links to biodiversity and decoding and the science that sits behind some of those themes. And we've seen a digital revolution that can dematerialize or can keep us working, in COVID when we don't need to travel. And there are so many technologies that enable us to decouple that scarce and harmful use of natural resources or negative social consequences, or to Paul's point, enhance the positive impact on the environment, regenerative agriculture, for example, or new jobs and new industries for people. How could we not, as leaders, step up in this next decade and find new ways to use those incredible discoveries and breakthroughs to build a better world for our children and our children's children? And not just that, but for the broader stewardship role that we have on this planet, right? That it's not just humans. And so I would just add those third and fourth layers: core business systematically going through every element of your organization. And fourth, looking at the new technologies and scientific breakthroughs in opportunity and decoupling negative consequences from the way we do business. I just think there's so much opportunity.
No, totally. I think those are additional points. Perhaps just maybe one quick one, because obviously the Unusual Pioneers is a platform for corporate social entrepreneurs. So the idea that actually employees within them would create some of these amazing new business models that are sort of the examples of what the future business model could look like. And I know you've done that at Accenture with creating Accenture Development Partners and all the work that Lisa Neuberger is doing. But also, Paul, of course, in your time at Unilever, you also work closely with the whole Shakti program, et cetera, to create new business models that are sort of the business models of the future. Do you feel that that helps you bring your broader purpose to life and bring this vision more tangible to employees and also customers, to the outside world? Whoever wants to go first, we'll have a quick answer. And then I also want to open up to some questions, because I see also many questions rolling in.
Yeah, no, we can go to the questions, but absolutely. As Peter says, study after study shows that we are at the point right now where the cost of not acting is higher than the cost of acting. And COVID has made us realize that. We've spent $17 trillion in Europe and the US alone just to save lives and livelihoods. And we're not out of the woods. Our food system is broken. The external costs that we are incurring for feeding the world is twice as high as what we're paying for food. And we can look at any of these systems. In fact, we can look at any of the sustainable development goals. And I would argue that in each of these 17 goals, we are already incurring costs that are higher than the implementation of all the sustainable development goals.
Absolutely right.
I think this is one of the reasons that you're actually seeing the financial market moving now so fast. Also in Glasgow, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero had $130 trillion. That's basically half the world's money making a commitment to decarbonize their portfolios. Rapidly, they're moving from risk management to opportunity. And the reason for that is very simply not a moral reason. I don't think the financial market moves that easily on moral reasons, but it is because of the financial opportunity that comes out of it. And it starts in a company with entrepreneurs, the same thing. Many people say, I can't do this, or I don't know how to get there. But it is actually entrepreneurship starting at the design phase. When we moved our factories, 582 factories, to zero waste, people said it can't be done. I said, take your time, take 5 years. It's going to cost you a lot of money. I said, I don't mind, tell me what it takes to do. But what we found was we actually moved all of our factories in 3 years to zero waste. And nature doesn't have waste. We invented waste as human beings, so we can also uninvent it if you want to. But what we found is that the customer service went up, the employee motivation went up, the quality of the products went up. So if you look at it as a systems change, you can do much more. I was talking yesterday to the Dow company, a chemical company, not an easy one to decarbonize, but all of their big initiatives, and they have made a net zero commitment for 2050 right now, and they're trying to do better than that. But they're looking at electric crackers. They're looking at making plastics from biomass, from biomaterials, or from waste. They're looking at making total closed loop systems, all in the design phase to get them there. I'm sure that, as Peter says, we always underestimate the speed with which technology moves. I'm sure that they will get there well beyond the dates that they set. And it's that entrepreneurship that we need, not only in innovations and technology, which is very important, but also in business models itself. And the
Absolutely.
third part, most importantly, is in the way we work in partnerships. It is very clear, as the book also says, that we cannot solve these issues anymore at the level that these issues are created. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So where we see the bigger breakthroughs coming from, also at the COP, was the Race to Zero breakthrough, Race to Resilience, is in these new partnerships that we've seen so well in the pharmaceutical company when COVID came out, extending to other categories to accelerate these transformations.
Yeah. So really, I think saying ESG, not seeing it as a risk perspective anymore, but as an opportunity, that is the way, and social entrepreneurship can drive that as well. So
although Saskia, I would say I totally agree with that, 100%. The only thing I would add to that is the urgency and the speed and the scale is being elevated by the level of risk, and I mean that in yes to the opportunity. What I can tell you, the conversations I've been having with insurance companies and anyone with a supply chain that spans the globe, and the number of events that are now wildfires, droughts, extreme weather patterns, crop failures. These are, and you may have seen last week, the reinsurance industry related to climate and its physical impact was up 30% in terms of costs. So it's not that I disagree with what you're saying. I would just add the urgency. And I think that urgency is also now impacting everyone, all of us. All of us are becoming very, I think existentially, very, very upset and nervous about what's happening. And rightly so, right? I think. And I think that's going to change consumer behavior, employee behavior, and who they choose to work for, which industries they choose to work for. And we're on, unfortunately, we're already at 1.2 degrees, right? And that has consequences. The one final thing I would say on entrepreneurship. So Paul, I think, made the right point at the beginning very kindly, about Julie, relatively new CEO, but doing phenomenally well. And I'm very lucky to have her as a sponsor, but her stepping up and making this, core part of our strategy, core part of 360-degree value. We have had success in the past with things like Accenture Development Partnerships and innovation. But what I would say now is we're moving to a world where, while I may have a team of 15,000 people focused on this topic out of the 674,000, we genuinely see 674,000 people who are being retrained, reskilled, and understand, to the points both of you have made, that the future success of business will be measured by the trade-offs and the balancing acts between financial value and ESG value creation and impact. And so I sort of see that entrepreneurship expanding to include the entire workforce of Accenture, and them coming up with creative ideas in their own areas and their own environments. And that can be genuinely one of our individuals. We buy 450 billions worth of third-party spend for our clients. Someone buying pens and pencils who understands how to make the trade-off with carbon, water, business and human rights, inclusion and diversity, or bribery and corruption, and skilling them and tooling them with the ability to add that to cost, quality, and availability in procurement. So I think it has to be entire organizations become innovators and entrepreneurs.
Definitely. I think I would summarize, so the risk perspective brings ESG into the boardrooms, and the opportunity one sort of keeps it there in the long run because it helps drive innovation as well. I'm also seeing that we're sort of coming onto the sort of time that we have to close, sadly. And there were great questions, so perhaps we can send some answers to the folks that asked them at a later stage. So I just want to stop with asking you both one simple question, which is, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future, and why? So if you can give me a one-sentence answer, and that would be a nice closing.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of it in this discussion, but I always use Desmond Tutu, and I was on a panel with him at the UN when he said, "I'm a prisoner of hope." Technology is going faster than we think. The Generation Z and millennials are more purpose-driven and driving this creative change, and you're a big part of that. The cost of action and inaction is starting to even satisfy the people that are looking for shareholder return. And that's one of the reasons the financial market is moving. Any study that we do, study after study, shows that it is totally feasible to get climate change under control, but also to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a matter of humanity rising to the challenge. And it is very clear that hope and to a certain extent optimism with critical outrage, if you want to, is the best driver for getting that change process. A fear will not do that, nor will it lead to anything. So we stay prisoners of hope.
Good.
I love Prisoners of Hope. I am extremely optimistic that it is possible to achieve everything that we need to achieve with the Sustainable Development Goals and the net zero economy with the existing technologies and the existing businesses and capital markets that we have. So I am also optimistic that that change is entirely in our own hands, right? It is entirely in our own hands, and it is possible. So I am optimistic. I have good days and bad days, depending on which conversations I've just had. But I am very clear it is possible, and I am optimistic that we will, I hope, make the right choices. So I also join Paul in the cell as a prisoner of hope.
Very.
Thank you so much. So we ended on a high note. We're hopeful for the future, and we are also not naive about it. We know that not everything always works easily, but at least there's hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Peter, for spending the time. And I think we had a great conversation about how can we really change companies for the better, because that's going to be the major driver in ensuring that that hope actually becomes a reality. So big thank you. And we're closing the live stream now. Thanks again.
Thank you, Saskia.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you.
Thank you, Paul.
Fantastic.